course, it's a big day today, the King's speech. A bold new era, according to Sir Keir Starmer. Without further ado, then, let's cross live to our political editor, Christopher Herb. Good evening to you, Christopher. Anyone that's not been following the twists and turns of the day, bring us up to speed.
Hi, Michelle. Yeah, great to be on your show tonight. Yeah, it's the King's speech. It sets out a two-year programme for government. Around 40 draft and actual bills will be considered by MPs over the next 2 years or so. The last King's speech, of course, by the Tory party last November. Lots of interesting themes in there. I've counted the words Brexit 6 times back in November's King's speech. This time, 0. No mention of Brexit, but the EU, European Union, was mentioned 15 times. I wonder if that's a kind of idea of where we're going with this government, to get closer to the EU, not further away. We heard, didn't we, from Sir Keir Starmer. He said in his prepared remarks that the snake oil charm of populism may sound seductive, but it drives us into the dead end of further division and greater disappointment. So clearly this is a King's speech designed to reassure and show the country that the government has changed in a kind of steady way. I would argue that if you're a Labour activist, you might wonder if this is it. You've waited 14 years for a Labour government, and it's quite a lack of ambition in many of the measures. The most striking left-wing measures, I'm not sure if Aaron Bastani might agree with this, but the most striking ones probably are the employment rights bill. So anyone signing up to join a company can get immediate access to parental leave and sick pay rather than waiting a few months before you're signed up. I wonder whether that might mean that companies may be reluctant to give full employment rights and be reluctant to hire people in future at the risk of having to pay upfront costs that they weren't expecting. Also, an English devolution bill, further powers for our metro mayors, renationalising the railways gradually. As those franchises come up for grabs, they'll be handed back into state control. Aaron might like that, as I say, and further areas on better buses, certainly Jeremy Corbyn did. But they have pulled back on some areas. House of Lords reform, they're going to get rid of 80 or so hereditary peers, but not kick out anyone aged over the age of 80, like Alf Dubs in his 90s, quite a legend in many people's circles. He came over on the Kindertransport from Nazi Germany. He can carry on being a peer. So they're pulled back in some areas. Votes at 16, that also is not here. And there's a draft bill which will be controversial. That's to try and that is called the Draft Equality, Race and Disability Bill, forcing companies to say what they pay people of colour, black people, against white people, and also whether able-bodied people are paying more than those who are disabled, in the same way that the gender pay gap is published by big companies. So that's a draft bill. They may not happen for 2 years, but that's the direction of travel. But I just wonder where's the actual beef here? If you're a Labour supporter, you've been waiting 14 years, a long time, a generation even, for a Labour government. Is this enough, or is it too safety first for many people? I think we'll see that emerge over the next 5 days of debate about the King's speech, and then, of course, the PMQ's debate between Sir Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak next week.
Thank you very much for that, Christopher Herb. Look, it's very much about you guys at home as well tonight. How do you feel about some of the priorities? Rob, you're not feeling very optimistic. He's been in touch and said there's nothing in Labour's plan that makes me feel anything other than terrified for the future. Really? There's nothing at all that you're happy about? Many people are asking about some of the house building situations there. You might have heard some lines today about it's going to be not about if we build, but how we build, and all of this kind of community involvement about what and where is getting built. Yes, you will get a say, but not perhaps when it comes to vetoes in the way that perhaps people might have been expecting or perhaps have been used to. Another of my viewers says Labour's time in office will be very short based on what we've seen today. So I want some optimism from some of you guys at home. Is there anyone out there that feels good? Because one thing that you can't deny is a new era. Things absolutely are going to change. You got a shout out quite a few times there from Christopher Herb. You are of the left, a Labour supporter. Do you feel optimistic today?
Well, I'm certainly on the left. I'm not always a Labour supporter. I'm a critical friend at times. I thought it was actually quite underwhelming.
Right.
But at the same time, Michelle, you were saying that comment from one of your viewers, he's terrified. If you're very rich and you've been reading for several years about how Labour is going to destroy you, come after you, you'd probably be looking at this and thinking, is that it? So, it works both ways. They don't want to scare the horses, and I think in doing so, they've been ultra cautious and they've not done very much. I would also add, they've got fewer than 10 million votes. If they'd got 13.5 million votes, I think there would have been a bunch of stuff in there that isn't in there, because they know there isn't a huge mandate.
Like what? So give me one thing that you think, if they got more of the vote share or whatever, what's the big thing that jumps out to you?
I think they'd be more adventurous on something like 16 to 18-year-olds getting the vote. I think you might have seen something like HS2. I think scrapping the welfare, the benefits cap for 2 kids.
Yeah.
I think that would have gone. I think you would have had a couple of things like that. It wouldn't have been fundamentally different, but this is the most cautious possible version of the King's speech. And I think if, like I say, things are played out a little bit differently on July the 4th, they had a bit more of a mandate from the public, I think they'd be a little bit less risk-averse. Just to be clear, 1 in 5 registered voters voted Labour. So 1 in 3 voters voted Labour on the night, but of course we had a very low turnout.
We
1
did.
in 5 registered voters voted Labour. And you could take a step back and think, well, actually, that's not a mandate for the kind of changes that the country needs. I personally think that, which is why I support PR.
One of my viewers has also pointed that out and said, Michelle, please, could you remind people that ultimately 80% or thereabouts of the people that are entitled and able to vote didn't actually vote for this government and their priorities? I think you make an interesting point, but of course, Aaron says, quite rightly too, the turnout was very low. So, of course, people that sit there now and say, well, we didn't vote for this. Did you vote for anything at all? Because if you didn't, some would say, you kind of lose your right to complain about it. Anyway, Ben Habib, just the bigger picture, and don't worry, we're going to get into some of these areas as we progress through the show, but face value, top level, your thoughts?
Well, I'm impressed that Aaron thinks it's an underwhelming set of measures and that Christopher Hope similarly said the same. I mean, I'm horrified by them. I have the privilege of being well off, but it's not the taxation side of it that's going to come first. It's going to come all the damage to the economy and to the constitutional structure of this country is what's embedded in this document here. And I mean, just starting at the top, they talk about the need for growth, but every aspect of this document heaps on more regulation for employers, more regulation to make sure we have equal outcomes on ethnic minorities, more regulations in terms of handing over powers to devolved authorities, making it even more complex in the way that this country is governed. And then the continuance of the hollowing out of our democracies. I say continuance because Blair started it, and the way he did it was to create lots of quangos, give them lots of power, remove political scrutiny from the way the country is governed. And right at the top of the list, there's going to be legislation passed to ensure that the Office of Budget Responsibility gets to sign off effectively on the finance aspects of what government does. There are 2 aspects to governance. It's the creation of regulations and it's the imposition of taxes. And if you have to get the OBR's sign-off, you have actually just stripped away from Parliament and from government one of the biggest levers that they have. So when you vote for Rachel Reeves, if you're mad enough to do that, what you're voting now for is the OBR, not for Labour's policies. So I see this as a stepping stone, the entire project that's described in the King's speech, as a stepping stone towards greater regulation, less energy security, we haven't touched on that, a further hollowing out of the Constitution and our democratic rights as people. And the next step, in my view, will be much higher taxation, because the damage this will do to the economy, to our ability to get energy cheaply, to operate businesses profitably, will be vast.
I'll bring in another reaction, instant reaction actually to this. So Liz Truss, do you remember Liz Truss? Well, she took to Twitter or X with quite, I thought it was quite interesting. I'll get it up on the screen actually and I'll show you it. It was quite a considered and well mocked up graphic, which that was the first thing that caught my eye. And it said Liz Truss in big bold letters. It says Starmer's King's speech shows that Labour has no idea about the change that Britain needs. Instead, it expands the power of the unelected state and increases red tape on families and businesses. And then it goes on. She says the bad policies include giving more powers to a failed OBR, reintroducing Stalinist housing targets rather than a zoning system. She talks about conversion therapy ban, which will be misused by gender ideologues, and a counterproductive and unconservative smoking ban. The results of these policies will be further economic stagnation and cultural decline.
Well, I agree with her. I think she's got it right. She missed out the the damage to our democracy that this will do. But she started off with that. She hinted at it with the OBR.
But I just thought it was, I mean, maybe I'm making a little bit too much of this, but just the way it was this kind of typed up within a graphic, with this logo and with a big name at the top, I thought, what is that? What are you trying to be? What's your ambition? What's your aspiration? It struck me as just a little bit odd. Why not just write a tweet?
Well, she was the Prime Minister.
For about 44 days, was it?
I thought you were going to say 10 minutes, but it was 44 days.
No, it was about
Good
44 days. I don't know, maybe I was just reading something into it. I just saw it and I just thought, what an odd kind of state of affairs we sometimes have. It's this whole ego that surrounds politics.
She can't possibly be going for the leadership of the Conservative Party.
Well, this is what I was thinking. I was just looking at it. I was just thinking, what is it? What is that about? Am I overthinking this?
I think she probably looks at Tony Blair. He's got, his little Tony Blair Institute with several $100 million. And she's thinking,
it's massive.
Yeah, it's the biggest.
For changing the world. The Tony Blair
biggest one in
Institute
Europe.
For changing the world, no less.
So she's like, well, you know what? I can make up a nice tweet.
Or maybe she's got a lot of time on her hands, enough time to do graphics. What do you think to that?